Welcome to Fueling Conversations, the Sport Nutrition Education Network podcast with Dr. James Fleming. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Leta Pilic, registered nutritionist and expert in nutrigenetics, to explore how DNA-informed nutrition can support athletic performance and where its limits lie. We unpack what personalised nutrition really means, moving beyond one-size-fits-all advice to strategies shaped by individual biology. In this conversation, we discuss how genetic variations affect caffeine metabolism, oxidative stress, and injury recovery, using DNA insights to inform supplement and recovery strategies for marginal gains, why genetic testing shouldn't be used for talent identification or performance prediction, and much, much more. A balanced, evidence-informed discussion for practitioners, athletes, and anyone curious about the future of personalised performance nutrition. Let's get into it.
Hi, Leta. Thanks for joining me today. Just for context for the viewer or the listener, Leta and I met at St Mary's University maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
I think it was like 12 years ago.
Some time ago, before I was so grey. And Leta will tell you all about what she does. But for a long time, we've been discussing around the idea of sporty genetics, so sports and genetics, and a little teaser there, and we're going to go into that space today. So Leta, could you introduce yourself properly, what you do, your background, and then we'll delve into it.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, James. It's nice to see you again. So yes, I'm a nutritionist by background. I'm a registered nutritionist with the Association for Nutrition. So obviously my undergraduate degree was nutrition, which was then followed by a master's in public health. Which then, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, led me to do a PhD in personalized nutrition. So I've completed a PhD on the topic of genetic predisposition to salt sensitivity of blood pressure. So how our DNA and genes affect our blood pressure response to salt, and whether that also affects the way we taste salt and how much salt we eat. That was at St Mary's University, so where we met. I was teaching while I was doing my PhD, and then I stayed to work as a lecturer at St Mary's in nutrition, but mostly teaching on our master's nutrition and genetics. So I was researching obviously after my PhD and still actively researching in the area of nutrition and genetics and personalized nutrition. And I also recently, I stopped working in academia. I have my company, which is called Optimyse Nutrition, where I have like two types of offerings, or even three, I will see, but I'm trying to build it as a system, let's say. So I offer DNA testing for individuals where they can find out about their genetic predispositions in terms of how to better manage their weight, or cardiometabolic health, or vitamin and mineral status, and so on. So how to optimize their health, essentially. But I also work with nutritionists that would like to use DNA testing in their practice, so they can use my test with their clients. And I've also developed an online course, which is called Nutrigenetics Mastery. So I provide online education for nutrition professionals in the area, of course, of nutrition and genetics and personalized nutrition. And also trying to go into digital space. So looking to build a digital behavior change tool that we can kind of incorporate in our services when working with clients, because psychology and behavior change are super important. So yeah, that's where I am at the moment.
Nice. It's so cool to see the evolution as well, because I remember the first time you came to me and said, what do you think of this name? What do you think of this logo?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really cool to see. And also, just for a bit of context, not the viewer necessarily needs to know this, but I remember I was doing my MSc at St Mary's, and you were in the seminar for SPSS, and I'm not a massive stats person. And I remember being like, Leta, help, what is this? What is Mortuary sphericity? I don't know if I know or care what this is. And I remember you helping me out, and I was really, really appreciative. I know you're in, I think, maybe your second year as a PhD student.
Yeah.
And how we are now.
Not stats expert either, but yeah.
But now how we've progressed, I can run a T-test with that support. Okay, so can you just, there's two things that came to mind from your introduction. Can you explain to the listener what personalized nutrition is? Because that term is used quite readily within sport, nutrition, Instagrammers. So what is the actual definition of that, do you think?
Yeah, well, good question. So I don't think there is a consensus definition of personalized nutrition, but what essentially I would say this is providing dietary or lifestyle advice based on individuals' unique characteristics. So now we often, when we think about personalized nutrition, we think of this kind of fancy, oh, it needs to be your microbiome, or it needs to be your DNA, or some fancy kind of biological measurements, and then we provide dietary advice based on your DNA, or as I say, your microbiome, or whatever it is. But essentially, it can be as simple as I look at your diet, what you're eating currently, and then provide advice based on that as well, and that's also personalized nutrition. So there are different levels of kind of how to individualize this advice, but the point is that it is individualized according to your specific characteristics.
Perfect. So in fact, everyone is probably right in some way.
Yeah.
Can you introduce we're going to dive into kind of genetics and sports nutrition specifically here, obviously, for the audience. Can you introduce genetics in brief so people understand what that even is, and then how or why there can be an interaction between our genetics and our sports performance or our sports nutrition?
Yeah, okay, so in like a one minute genetics 101, I'll try to explain it as I explain it to let's say when I work with clients. Okay, so obviously our DNA is like a recipe book. It makes us who we are. So our DNA is made of 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. And we have 3 billions of these letters in our DNA. And DNA is just a sequence of these 4 different letters in different orders, different sequences. And now specific portions of the DNA, specific parts of DNA or specific sequence of the letters are called genes. And these genes create proteins. And now proteins, of course, we know are essential, for to build muscle. They are enzymes, they are hormones, they are transport proteins. So imagine in relation to nutrition, of course, when we think about enzymes or proteins that transport nutrients inside and outside of the cells or different hormones, they are very relevant. So we all have all the genes. It's not that, oh, I have the fat gene, you don't have the fat gene. We all have all the genes that have create different proteins that have different roles in our body. But we may have different versions of these same genes. And that's that's what we are interested in. Now, because of these different versions of the genes that we have, we may respond differently to the same nutrient or diet or to the same, I don't know, exercise regime. So for someone, high protein diet may be really, really beneficial if they want to lose body fat, let's say, so increase lean muscle or whatever it is. I don't know, even in context of when we talk about athletes. But for someone, this high protein diet isn't going to work. So we need to find a different approach. And that's because of these different genetic versions or genetic variations, as we call them. So we have a lot of examples as well in sports where actually, because of these genetic differences, athletes may respond differently to the same intervention. So we can obviously talk about these in more detail, but I'm not sure if now you're an expert in DNA.
I think you set the scene nicely, and I guess there's been a lot of movement with regards to things like blood testing and being able to do things like that at home. How relevant or how easy is it for us to do genetics testing? I might be jumping ahead, but let's talk about how it's done, and then we'll go into maybe some of the specific genes that could have the biggest impact on sporting or exercising individuals.
Yeah. Okay. So from kind of like a logistics technical aspect, how do we do it? It's very simple. So it's usually either a saliva or a cheek swab sample. So if it's saliva, you literally spit in a pot at home. So you get sent a DNA testing kit. Nowadays, You can order them online. There are hundreds of DNA testing companies. Now, obviously, some are better than the others. We need to be a bit critical there, but maybe we can talk about that later. But anyway, you can order it online. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper. So I don't know, average cost of a DNA test, maybe £100 or so, 200. You do it only once. You don't have to do it retest because your DNA doesn't change. So you do it only once. So you order a test. You either get that pot to collect your saliva, or you get a cheek swab to swab obviously inside your cheek, something that we were doing for COVID testing, but obviously something to your nose or throat. I do prefer a swab because it's more elegant, I think, less messy. You sent the swab back via post. The company then sends that usually to a third-party lab, which is all great because all the labs are certified and kind of very accurate. So we don't worry really about the kind of the accuracy of the results that we get from the lab. And then the company actually kind of puts these results into like a user-friendly interface, whether it's a very simple PDF report or an app. This is where issues can arise because it's up to the experience of the company and people that work with the company, how they interpret these results, which is like a Wild West, I would say. But anyway, you get these results as a PDF or in an app, and you can, or you don't have to. There is an option, and there should be an option to be able to have a consultation with a nutrition professional that is able to interpret your DNA results to you in context, obviously, of your lifestyle, diet, whatever it is. Some companies don't do that, so you just get your results and then you kind of interpret it yourself in a way. But it's simple. We can access it, obviously, if we have the money to do it. Yeah.
But for context, like if people are taking home blood tests and there can be variability in nutrient markers within hours, let alone days, and hormonal profile, those sorts of things, then actually doing something once is a great affordable thing. And although we say 100, 200 pounds, people might be listening and saying, well, that's still a lot of money. People are spending hundreds of pounds on supplements all year and taking them outside the recommended doses, or maybe not necessarily doing it appropriately. So it's an interesting one. That, again, it's obviously it's growing and it's an evolving space, hence why we wanted to talk about it. Can we dive into the sports or the exercising individual and maybe the most relevant gene interactions there? And then I've got a few things I want to touch on caffeine if we can, and there was, just so I don't, because my brain's all over the place, I'm going to blame the kids. I want to touch on epigenetics as well at some point, so maybe we can start with the most common or most appropriate genes that have interactions for exercising individuals.
Again, now let's think of, well, it depends. Now, professional athletes are like or elite athletes are one specific type of obviously consumer, where I think DNA testing can really do a lot, because just to start off, and then I will give examples, because obviously we are talking about minor differences or improvements that we want to observe that make a lot of difference, let's say. So even if you're like a split second faster, that's amazing. And that's, I think, where genetics can really add something, because it's these minor improvements that make a real difference. So in athletic populations, I think DNA testing, and that's why I think it is exploding actually. But also obviously in exercising individuals as well can be very useful. And when you mention kind of they take lots of supplements, do all of these types of different tests. So actually once in a lifetime DNA test isn't that prohibitive, I would say. And then if we think about what I usually try to cover when talking, I'm not a sports nutritionist. I'm a nutritionist with obvious experience in nutrition and genetics, and I can kind of interpret nutrition and genetics in different contexts, including sports here. So when I talk about sports nutrition, we think about kind of performance, injury, and recovery. We want to perform better. We don't want to get injured, obviously, as frequently, and we want to recover faster so we can exercise more and be better. So it's like a cycle, I guess. About kind of different genes in these different areas. I think when we talk about performance, we need to talk about caffeine, and you wanted to talk about caffeine. And I think that's where we actually have most evidence for. So we have a specific gene that's called cytochrome P450, or it's called CYP1A2. It creates this enzyme, cytochrome P450, that breaks down 99% of caffeine, essentially. So we have two different versions of this gene. So we have a version which we call fast caffeine metabolizer. So as the name says it, they break down caffeine faster. And then we have the slow metabolizer version. So these people break down caffeine slower. It lingers, let's say, in their system unmetabolized for longer periods of time. We know that caffeine is a vasoconstrictor. So it can actually obviously narrow our blood vessels. It can potentially increase our blood pressure. And now thinking about the context of performance, research says, and there's quite a lot of research, and actually I read the meta-analysis, which was published, I think, a year ago or something, so quite a recent one. And actually there is evidence which shows that for these fast metabolizers, in any type of sport, so it doesn't matter if it's aerobic or anaerobic, although aerobic type of sport, I think it would make more sense. They improve, their performance improves when supplementing with caffeine. However, for slow metabolizers, it doesn't make a difference, or it actually worsens it. So to have like a blanket approach for every athlete, and I guess it's the most commonly used ergogenic aid, take caffeine, well, for part of the population, and it's around even 40% of the general population that would be slow metabolizers, it wouldn't actually make a difference, or it could impair the performance. So that's where I think there is space to personalize.
I think there's a lot of noise around caffeine because there's been a new supplement called the caffeine melt with Nutrigenetics, which is a new science approach. So apparently it absorbs faster and to a better rate than chewing gum and other methods. There's been lots of evolution in terms of methods of taking caffeine, and also anecdotally, athletes love a coffee. So, and there was a post recently from Graham Close around how that becomes a bit of a hub in the environment of sports teams, particularly. Maybe not necessarily an ergogenic dose, but definitely an important behavioural thing. And like you say, for having those small marginal gains, understanding this is important. I guess from my critical mind, you have a lot of people that say, oh, I can't have a coffee after 4 o'clock because otherwise I won't be able to sleep. If it's those people that I won't be able to sleep, is that an indication that they are slow metabolizers?
Yeah, it could be. So we have, so this is one of the genes. We have the other gene, which is ADORA, which is adenosine receptor, essentially. And we know that caffeine obviously works on the level of these receptors. So we have, again, two different versions of this gene. We have a specific version that if you take caffeine, and especially in excessive doses, it actually makes you feel anxious and nervous. So it's either that one, but I have to say I'm a slow metabolizer of caffeine, and I only have one coffee in the morning, because if I do it later, I just become jittery. And then if you think about athletic performance, again, we don't want to be anxious or nervous before we need, before a competition or something like that. So yeah, in that sense as well.
I think it's super important for particularly younger practitioners that are coming in, because I've walked into many environments and there's been kickstart chewing gums everywhere, and athletes tend to, well, not always, but they'll take a chewing gum and then they'll feel something, and then they might double down on the dose, or maybe just think that that's the sole reason for something happening, and then not really think twice about anything. Do you know what I mean? And then if it has an impact on someone that has a significant impact, then other people might look up to those, and then it's quite easy to fall into a tricky space. So it'd be a nice thing to definitely quantify, to enable, again, better personalization, which ultimately, irrespective of being an elite athlete or not, it'd be good to know when our optimal time is to consume caffeine and whether
Yeah,
we need to do that, because
exactly.
symptoms in isolation are probably not going to be. I sometimes lost as well, hard to translate, right? So I think having that objective, this is what happens, is always going to be
Yeah.
quite powerful.
And sorry to interrupt you there, but you
No.
mentioned kind of the timing as well. And this meta-analysis was kind of, they looked at the timing as well. So actually, I don't know what like a usual approach is, an hour, 2 hours before, something like that. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but
Depends
it
on the
depends.
type.
Yeah. But maybe for slow metabolizers, actually, they need to take it even earlier for the effects to kick in. So there are these nuances as well that we can look at. And in terms of the general health for people that are slow metabolizers, it actually can impair their heart health. So if we think about long-term health of exercising individuals or athletic populations as well, then that's something to consider.
And back to the exercising average Joe, right? The mass is people that are doing a 50-hour work week and then training for an Ironman or training for an endurance event and surviving in the morning with a coffee, getting through mid-morning with a coffee, topping up with a coffee, and then just being
energy
on that
drink or something like that.
Well, yeah, it's just so common, isn't it? Like I sit here with a coffee myself, but it is so common. I think I think that's really good to know, and a powerful thing that we could definitely apply. Are there any other sort of genes, that maybe could play a potentially important role in those small percentages as well?
Yeah, I mean, there are many.
There's probably loads,
I have to say. So,
hence why there's a course.
but there are, when we think about, let's say, recovery as well, that's also like a big topic usually. So we know that antioxidants are quite popular, polyphenols and so on. So for some people, definitely there is a gene called superoxide dismutase, which is kind of endogenous, our body's defense from oxidative stress, which happens obviously during exercise, and it creates muscle damage and so on. So some people are more prone to this type of muscle damage. So they need to pay special attention to kind of potentially their antioxidant intake after exercising, or how long they recover for. There are genes as well associated with injury. So the genes that code for our collagen, and people that have specific variations or versions are more prone to tendon type injuries. So they need to pay attention, obviously, to warm up and cool downs and type of kind of be a bit more mindful of sudden movements and these things. So there are kind of different areas. What I want to, I know I can see that you want to ask something, but just so I don't forget, please.
Sure.
We need to make a distinction when we talk about using DNA testing in sports. So when we have these kind of interactions between our DNA and specific nutrients like caffeine and DNA, and we can see that if I personalize caffeine dose, it's probably going to affect my performance in a positive way. So that's something that we can and probably should already be doing. But what we shouldn't be doing is talent ID. So using genetics to predict if someone is going to be a good, marathon runner or a good tennis player, or they're going to excel in a specific type of sport, or using it obviously in children. And why I'm saying that, because this is being done. And I have I know an example of a Chinese Olympics team. They were selected based on this type of genotyping, and we just don't have enough evidence for that, because it's not very simple. We can't look at just one gene. We need to look at thousands of genes and how they interact to actually be able to predict this type of athletic success, let's say. So just to mention kind of the two different aspects of using DNA testing in sports.
It's really interesting. Do you think how far away are we, do you think, from being able to really quantify genetics with talent ID? Because obviously the money in sport now is huge, and succeeding has an impact on a global level, particularly in Olympic sports. So do you think we will be there in 5-10 years?
I'm not sure, to be honest, if you're ever going to be there, because we are so complex. So we have we keep on identifying new genes, let's say. So we don't even have the finite number of genes that we have. And then they interact with each other. And then our genes interact with our environment as well. Maybe this is now in terms of epigenetics as well, interesting. But we are very complex. So I don't know if we are ever going to be able to say, yes, you have this specific combination of these, I don't know how many genes. And when you talk about genes, then we can zoom into specific letters. So we can look at millions of letters in someone's DNA. And then I think it's hard. And I'm not sure that, well, in 5-10 years, I don't think we are going to.
Maybe too much of a micro focus when it needs more of a bigger, wider lens, and using in contribution with other things, right?
Exactly, with other factors. So we need to think. So that's why we mentioned kind of nutrient gene interactions, but it's kind of environment DNA interactions, because it's all different factors that we need to consider.
I'm going to home back for one, because there's a question I was going to ask in between that before you went into that epigenetic space, because I want to touch on that next. You mentioned around a gene interaction and collagen. I'm going to ask a question on this because collagen supplementation has blown up in the last 5 years, because collagen is obviously aligned with ligaments and tendons, and ligament and tendon injuries take a long time to recover from. And even anecdotally, a lot of people take collagen supplements every day. By having that knowledge around that gene that impacts collagen, would that be able to inform us on whether we should or shouldn't take collagen more regularly, or do we not have that knowledge yet?
We don't. I haven't really, to be honest. I'm not saying I'm a panacea of all the nutrition and genetics research, because like, who could keep up with that? I don't think we do. But then I don't know, in general, is there evidence that collagen supplements are useful or not?
There's a few papers. It's very difficult in injury, isn't it? Because you can't just injure someone and then do some studies. So there's some good research that suggests that having collagen can increase our collagen synthesis when you've done things like skipping and bits. So yeah, there's a few. It's not a great volume of papers, but there does seem to be some initial positive indications. And obviously at elite level, if we can find an effect, then and there's almost a bit of a no harm approach, right? But yeah,
maybe something to research then.
For sure. Maybe a PhD for someone out there if they want to get in touch with Leta. So can we? I know you're not busy enough. So can we go into the idea, because there's an element that came to mind when you were talking about the Chinese and our genes, that maybe I'm making an invalid judgment here, that our top athletes have probably got a really good genetic code, a genetic makeup, possibly. But what about, and the example I always talk about is you've got Usain Bolt, who's obviously the fastest man in the world, and he's married to someone and they've got a kid, I think, called Lightning Bolt, which always makes me laugh. So in principle, the daughter or son of Usain Bolt should have good genes, right?
Well, so I'm not sure that I would use like good or bad genes. We all have amazing genes.
Yes.
He has genetic predispositions clearly to be obviously an excellent sprinter. And yes, you would expect his kids to have at least some part of his predispositions. But I mean, it doesn't have to be always, because it's also the how you work with what you have.
Nice.
So if you don't have specific genetic predispositions, it doesn't mean that you can't be a super top athlete. It just means that you need to optimize your training to work with kind of what you have. And I think that's the beauty and the power of using as well this type of testing with athletes, because it can tell you actually where you are, maybe, again, I don't want to call it like a genetic weakness, but where you need to really pay a bit more attention to and think more how you work with that to actually excel at what you do. Probably Cristiano Ronaldo, I think he's more of a I work hard and I work well with what I have. I'm not saying that he's not genetically gifted or whatever, but I think it's looking at it from this perspective as well.
Nice. And can you just explain, because I think you've gone into that a little bit there, but for the audience, what is epigenetics? What is that principle?
It's now like a term that people are just throwing around. Epigenetics is not your DNA. You need to think about your environment. Yeah, obviously. So epigenetics, it just means epi means on top of genetics. So it's kind of our environment, our diet, and different lifestyle environmental factors. What they do is they add specific kind of chemical groups on top of our DNA, and that changes the way our genes behave, essentially. So if we take folate, for example, which I don't know if it's like but I guess it can be relevant as well for sports as well, so because it's the most potent kind of epigenetic nutrient. So folate is broken down in our body, and it provides a specific chemical group, methyl group, to our DNA, which actually turns specific genes off. They don't produce a specific protein that they are coding for, let's say. And this can be very useful because we don't want all the genes to be switched on all the time in specific types of cells, let's say. I don't know, something that is going to increase your proneness to muscle damage if you have specific inflammatory genes or something like that. Maybe you want them to be off. And I'm just throwing it as an example here. So we have dietary factors. So folate, B vitamins, choline, for example, is a potent donor of this methyl group that kind of regulates how our genes are then expressed on the outside, how much of this protein we are producing. But it's not just diet, it's exercise as well that can change how our genes are expressed. It's stress levels. It's kind of even there's some research that suggests that rats, mice, rats, the animals that aren't being cuddled by their moms, they have different kind of epigenetic signatures compared to the ones that are being kind of taken care of and shown this type of affection. So it's how our environment essentially changes the way our genes behave. And that's super interesting. But what we keep observing now in practice is that it's being used to determine mostly your biological age and how old you are biologically. So whether it's similar to your chronological age or not, or how can you potentially be younger, of course, biologically. But in my opinion, that's premature because these epigenetic signatures, so these kind of chemical groups that are being added to our DNA, that's very tissue specific. So something that happens in my muscle in terms of kind of these epigenetic changes, maybe it's not going to happen in my heart or lungs or I don't know, my blood vessels, wherever. So it's very tissue specific. So how can I practically measure what's happening on the level of my muscle or my heart or my lungs or whatever organ? I can't unless I do a biopsy. And obviously we're not going to be doing biopsies. That's very invasive. So what companies are now doing, they take your saliva or blood sample, but they can't measure these tissue-specific changes. They kind of measure your general kind of, let's say, epigenetic state, and then they try to use specific algorithms to kind of determine, okay, whether you are younger or older than you actually are, and then you need to change your lifestyle in a specific way to obviously improve this. In my opinion, it's a bit premature, but quite exciting, but very popular, I would say.
Especially with the longevity movement, right? And
exactly, and that's where the longevity, that's where it is being used mostly, yes, these biological clocks, yeah.
Interesting. Just a few more bits before we finish up, because we could speak forever. Can you just explain kind of how we could find out more about this? So obviously I've touched on a few bits and there's loads, and I've thrown questions at you that are really broad, and I think you've done a really good job at trying to bring it back down to a manageable kind of snap size introductions to the areas. How do we find out more? What could we do if, for those practitioners that are thinking, okay, we get blood tests regularly, we've never even considered this, what would you recommend as the next steps?
So I can
modest.
actually,
Don't be modest here, Leta.
yeah, okay, but we will put it in show notes, but we can, first of all, there is now it's a bit of an older one, but there was a paper that listed kind of educational opportunities in nutrition and genetics. Maybe some still exist, maybe some don't. I know that our nutrition and genetics masters isn't running any anymore, so I would have obviously recommended that. I have to mention that I have a specific kind of a very short, an hour-long evergreen type of a content, so on-demand session that talks about genetics and sports and provides more information about the examples that I've covered here. So that's also going to be, I guess you'll put it in show notes as well. And I've created the Nutrigenetics Mastery course, which is for nutritionists that either want to just learn about the basics, they don't have to apply it in practice because there is a very basic foundations tier, or those that want to use it with their clients, there is a practitioner tier as well. So feel free to explore these. And as I say, other than these, the types of opportunities that you will see in this research paper, it's just kind of, reading papers and kind of staying on top of the literature, because there aren't even that many textbooks that would teach you about this. And it's just the area that keeps on evolving very rapidly. So you need to be keeping up to date with the literature.
And is this kind of part of the puzzle? If we're talking about elite athletes, using this as part of the puzzle rather than going to get the testing done, getting the report and taking it for gold. Do you know what I mean? Is that how you
exactly
recommend?
Yeah, it's just like a cherry on top, I say, if that's what you're asking. So you shouldn't be using, we don't use DNA for either elite athletes or just your average Joe. We never use it in isolation. So it's like, oh, I do a DNA test and now I interpret whatever it is. We need to know about, your bigger picture. We need to have a bigger picture, and then it's like a cherry on top to optimize whatever we are doing. And this is really what I try to teach as well. How and when should we use it? Because we don't necessarily have to use it with every single person. Maybe they're not really good candidates, let's say, for a DNA test. But definitely always use it in combination with other information that you have.
Nice, and we'll just close with obviously we'll have footnotes, and I think you mentioned the term optimize, and just for the listener, obviously we'll put links into your company so you can see that and the courses. Always try and finish off with a bit of a quick fire round, which is always cheesy, but I'm unapologetic on this one. So one food you can't live without, Leta.
He told me that he's going to ask me this, and I
didn't
still
tell
don't
you,
know, but I would say pizza or pasta.
Yeah, nice. Just my personal preference is apple pie or apple crumble.
Apple pie.
Are you still getting a good apple pie in Croatia, or?
That's why I'm saying we never have apple crumble. Like, you can have like apple pie maybe, but that's
I need to get myself over to Croatia and do a little side hustle, because it's and then I guess we've already covered it really, but best bit of advice for someone who's listening to this, who's thinking this could apply to my athletes, and how to go around, what would, not necessarily having to do a course or the rest of it, but in terms of, you mentioned the Wild West. If there's someone listening to this and going, well, I'd like to do this, and then I Google, I want to get some genetics testing, any best bit of advice on how to potentially navigate that?
Well, okay, if you want to, you can obviously go online, type in, DNA testing service, and what you need to check is who is behind the company. Do they have a nutritionist? Do they have a nutritionist that actually can interpret DNA and just go a bit into if they have some bits on, you know, kind of their science, how they are deriving these reports. You won't see all this information because sometimes it's just you don't want other competitors to, you know, to see kind of how you're doing that. But dig a bit in terms of kind of who is in the background of this company, because you can order DNA testing. Contact me as well if you want to just chat about it, because I'm really always happy to chat about it. But then one kind of mindset thing is don't be scared, because if you are really kind of looking into it, or you've now kind of we sparked your interest, or you were interested before, just go for it. I don't know how to say it, but what we've noticed is that people are super keen, super interested, and it all sounds great, but then they're just scared to kind of start, because you are scared, I don't have enough knowledge. We will never know everything. You don't have to know everything. You just need like some starting point, and then obviously from experience you build on that. So if you are interested, just start, and we can always connect on LinkedIn, and then I can point you in the right direction.
Thanks, Leta. I mean, we coined the cheesy term sporty genetics just because I was doing sports nutrition and you were doing genetics some time ago, and it's exciting to see how it is evolving. And I would speak personally that it can seem a little bit daunting, but you've broken down some key things that I know that every practitioner would benefit from, you know, knowing a little bit more on, and it could apply to all environments that I've worked in the past. So yeah, thanks for breaking down some quite heavy science.
Yeah. Sorry, just to finish with, because obviously you mentioned something that's very, you don't have to be a geneticist, you don't have to be a molecular biologist, you don't have to know what every single gene does on a very kind of deep level. You need to appreciate some of the key concepts of molecular biology, but you are still the practitioner that, you know, you have the knowledge. You just need some bits of information to actually be able to apply it in your practice. So you don't need to have like a PhD level knowledge of genes and DNA to be able to do this and practice it.
Lovely. And we will hold it there. It'd be really nice to talk. Thanks, Leta, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, James.